Hello, trumpet players and other musicians, because this is not just for trumpet players. We're talking about the metronome today. I got a question on one of the other videos from Vlad. He wanted to know what my thoughts were about using the metronome. Well, my perspective on the metronome goes all the way back to the beginning. To my knowledge, to my memory, I had the metronome on for almost all of my practice time for the first 20 years of my practice. And that includes rudiments, and I only say that now because later we're going to talk about rudiments. Um, so I think it was just about 20 years. I might be exaggerating just a tiny bit, okay? And it is kind of funny because we didn't have digital metronomes in the 70s and the 80s. Well, at least I didn't. And my metronome was one of those little, well, actually, I think I had a bigger one first. But what I remember, and this we're talking decades ago, was that there was something wrong with mine, and it would go tick, 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 tick. I had to manipulate. I would put papers under it to try to get it to lean one way or lean the other way, or different stuff like that, trying to get this thing to even out. But yes, I was actually very, very committed in my earliest years to having that metronome on, and I'm so glad I did. You know, I went to a junior college, and for those of you outside of the country, this is sort of like a diploma school. I know that my wife is from South Africa, so I know over there this would be more like a trade school, tech school. They don't have junior colleges, I don't think, in South Africa. So I'm assuming other countries might not have that. So we're talking about a non 4 year. So you don't get a degree like a 4 year degree. So the reason I'm saying this is because I already had, when I went to this trade school, if you want to call it that, um, 6, 7 years of schooling at the tertiary level already, and took that step backwards to go to a junior college after all that schooling. And also by that time I was already established as a pro. That's how I was paying for school, was by playing my horn. And so when I joined the jazz band at the school, and I remember very specifically one of the rehearsals, the conductor was talking to the rhythm section, and the rhythm section at the time also had two other people who were pros. That happens a lot in the junior colleges here, is that professionals will come back and take some courses, or they'll just use it as an opportunity to play. So anyway, the conductor of the group said to the rhythm section that they were trying too hard to keep time during my improvised solo. And his exact words, that Eddie Lewis is time. He was complimenting my sense of time. He was saying that they don't need to work so hard to keep time because I was doing that for them as the soloist. And that is after all those years of using the metronome. There is a reason to use the metronome, a legitimate, valid reason to use the metronome. So in the long term, And this is different from what we're going to talk about at the end of the video. In the long term, the reason why we want to have this metronome going on while we're practicing is because our natural sense of time is flawed. You know that old saying that says time flies when you're having fun? Our sense of time, this is a truism, right? Time flies when you're having fun. Our sense of time changes when what we're doing changes. Another example of this is people who say their life, like right before a a wreck or something, a car crash or something. They said their life flashed before their eyes and everything is moving slow. Well, what happens is your adrenaline or something kicks in, your internal clock speeds up, and everything seems so slow because your mind's going so fast. I've had experiences like this. I remember one time my car did this, and it was like very slow motion, right? Slow motion. Why my mind is going, right? That means everything around me is going slower than my mind, right? And this is a normal phenomenon. How we perceive time changes according to what we're doing. Now, how is that going to affect our music? When we play quote unquote more difficult, harder music, the time slows down. Okay? When we're playing easy stuff, the time speeds up. So that's why, and this is a phenomenon, I don't think I've ever had a student, I'm talking about the young ones, right? I don't think I ever had a student that didn't have that problem, right? They'll be playing something that has 8 notes. Da 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 dee, da 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 da. Da 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 dee, da 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 da. Da 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 da. Right? When they're playing the long note, and you can even watch their feet, right? They tap faster and that's because of our natural sense of time has not been harnessed and controlled. And the way we do that is with an external stimulus. Let's say that again. External stimulus that we can rely on. Okay? That, over the long term, is the purpose of having a metronome, so that when we are in different musical contexts, our internal sense of time doesn't get affected that way. And it does. It takes years and years and years to make this work. It takes years, decades sometimes. For me, see, I'm a slow learner. What kind of YouTuber admits that, right? I'm a slow learner. But that's what makes me such a good teacher, right? And also a good player for that matter. I mean, you'll never hear me say that I am a good player, but where I am, the progress that I have made is because I'm a slow learner. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not one of those who thinks I'm all that much, right? I don't have that kind of attitude about myself. And that other video is still coming. I promised it in a previous video. We're going to talk about my view about what I have to say compared to what all the famous people have to say. Okay, that's coming. I just want to do a good job on that video, so it's in the works, but we're going to get to that. All right, so what else do I have to say about this? So we talked about that its long-term use is to get us to even out our sense of time, right? Now, the next thing I'm going to say is that when are we going to use the metronome? Because this came up in Vlad's question to me. Because I don't, today, and I know there's a lot of, once again, we're talking about famous people. I know there's famous people that believe that you absolutely must have the metronome on for the rudiments, for the exercises, right? I disagree with that. When you're using my system, don't do that. And we'll talk about that. I like with the rudiments to take it in a sort of rubato manner, so that for those things I want to focus on, I can spend more mental effort on those things. And a great example of that is the tonalization studies. Let's say my range only goes up to high C, because I'm not going to squeak out high notes for you guys, especially not on this horn, right? So let's say I'm playing tonalization studies in E flat, and let's say my top of my range is high C. I want to slow down when I get up to the high C so I can feel every single note. Remember, everything we do when we're doing the routine, the warm-up, is experiential, okay? It's a feedback loop of sorts. We want to hear, we want to feel, and we want to do, right? And all of that is feeding back on itself to create the best playing that we can. So when I get up to those highest notes, see what I'm doing? I'm slowing down at the top so that I can spend more time feeling and listening. And you see what I'm saying? We have a term here, milking it, right? I'm milking those notes for everything I can get out of it. Okay, I'm stretching that experience. So that's why I don't use it. And that was just one example, but I do not use it even in the triple tongue, right? Normally you would think triple tongue needs to be rhythmical, right? But if I'm doing something, right? I just improvised all that. That's not something out of my book. But I want to slow down for the stuff that I'm not as confident on. And in fact, most of the triple tongue stuff in the ends of some of the books that I have, the really, really hard stuff, I'm playing it at about that tempo. You'll notice that my books rarely have any mention of tempo anywhere. I don't care about the tempo. I care about, instead, accuracy and perfection. I'm contradicting myself right now, right? Because I said it's not about perfection in a previous video. But um, let's change the word, not perfection, but excellence. We want excellence. So you slow down when you're doing the rudiments for the sake of excellence. Now, let's talk about when you're working on literature. Now, I use the word literature to encompass everything that's not an exercise, both on the jazz side and on the classical side. I know it's a word that we use for classical, but I use the same word for jazz to cover stuff like tunes, uh, practicing transcriptions. Even when I do my language stuff, I still consider that part of the literature, okay? On the classical side, we're practicing etudes and solos. I don't like to practice very often ensemble stuff unless it's specifically challenging. But yes, anything of that nature, I lump that all into the category of literature. Excuse me. And I have and we can't go into details right now, but I have a series of 7 stages that I teach my students and that I use myself for practicing literature. Now, here's why I'm telling you that. For all of the stages except for the last stage, we are using the metronome to make sure that we're not going any faster than 2/3 of the desired tempo. So, for example, just to keep it simple, keep the math simple, if the composition is supposed to be performed at 100 beats per minute, we practice at no more than 66 beats per minute for almost all of those stages except for the last stages. That's 2/3 of the tempo, okay? Now, you can't do that by feel. You can't say, oh, I feel like this is about 2/3 of the tempo, okay? So this is a little bit different from what most people would do with the metronome, right? Most people do what I call the metronome method. And so within those 7 stages, we do use the metronome method, but we use it when you can't play up to the 2/3 tempo, right? So let's say, for example, you're working on a composition, you get to a part that you can't do at 2/3 tempo. Now you use the metronome method to drill that section that you're having trouble with to get it up to 2/3 of the tempo. Now let's talk about what is what is the metronome method, okay? The metronome method, generally speaking, and you can change this according to whatever your needs are, you take the desired tempo, you cut that in half. So let's say the piece is, let's say we're not doing my 7 stages, right? Let's talk about what the metronome method is. I will have another more thorough metronome method video, but just for the sake of answering the question, how do I use the metronome? What are my thoughts on the metronome? We're going to talk about the metronome method, right? So let's say we have a piece that we're working on, and it goes, the tempo is 100 beats per minute. We're not using my 7 stages. We're just using the metronome method. By the way, the metronome method, I made Allstate in Texas, and that's a pretty big deal in Texas because it's so competitive. I made Allstate in high school 2 times, and the metronome method was the only practice technique I knew. So I got that music learned to that competitive level only by using this method that I'm showing you right now. Okay, so the tempo is 100. You want to take and move the metronome to 50 now. And take the sections, so you can do this with either sections of the music or the whole piece. And in fact, it shouldn't be either or. You should actually do both that way, right? And we're not going to talk about how to cut the piece up because that's not part of this. I'm answering a specific question here. Yes, we are going to have a methodic way of approaching what parts do you do in what order and stuff like that. That's what my 7 stages is, right? But right now we're just talking about the metronome method. Half tempo. And by the way, I just did a video before this called the practice formula. You can click on it here. This video is probably coming out a week after that video, okay? Because as I said in that video, if I put them too close to each other, one of the 2 videos is not going to get views. And that's not good. That's wasting my time. And you're not going to end up, for some reason, it won't end up on your feed or whatever, and you won't even know about the other video. And that just doesn't make sense. So I'm going to spread these out. This video, I had, in order to answer this question, I had to make this other video first because I do have a formula that I apply, and um, the metronome method definitely fits that. Okay, so I want to encourage you to watch if you haven't watched it already, watch the practice formula video. All right, now, so what am I doing? Okay, so we're at half tempo. We play the part that we're trying to work on 10 times. And you know what? While I'm at it, let me tell you that you have to be decisive. Don't change which part you're working on, right? Choose a section. If it's the whole thing, do the whole thing. If it's just a single part, do that single part. You know, like 2 measures or whatever. Stick to that. Systems don't work if you don't follow the system, okay? So you repeat it 10 times correctly. Repeat it 10 times correctly, and then move the metronome up 1 notch. And I have to clarify that the metronomes, the traditional metronomes, don't go in single digit intervals, right? So it's not gonna, I was at 50, it's not going to 51, it's going to 52. Up until 60, it goes in 2, divided by 2. After 60, it's divided by 3, and then divided by 4, and so on, okay? So don't go 71, 72, 73, 74. That is a waste of time, okay? So 10 times perfectly, correctly. I'm trying to say, stop saying perfect right now because of that epiphany that I had a week ago, but the language, it's hard to change language, right? So I don't mean perfect anymore. I don't want to say perfect evermore, anymore ever, right? So after you do 10 times at 52, go to 10 times at 54. When you've done 10 times at 54, you go to 10 times at 56, and so on, until you get to 100. That is the metronome method, and it's an extremely powerful method. If it is so extremely powerful, why then do I not do it all the time anymore? Well, because it's very time consuming. Okay? I'm not afraid to spend time, and you'll know that from the previous video. I'm not afraid to spend time, but if I know how to get the same job done with less time, I would rather do that. So the metronome method has its uses, but there are other methods too. Now, I'm going to clarify one more time. Using those other methods, the metronome should be on. And that's why I'm talking about this the way I am. I'm stuttering too much too. That's why I'm talking about this the way that I'm talking about it. Because I have those 7 stages. We'll eventually talk about that. And during that time, the metronome is on. Because of the long-term effects and because we don't want to get in over our head. We don't want to let it creep up to tempo. So the metronome is on, but we're not necessarily using the metronome method. I think that's the point I'm trying to drive home here. The metronome is on during other types of practice, but we're not trying to, um, uh, use that method. Other times you will use the method, okay? Now, another question he asked was about drum loops. I don't have as much experience with drum loops. And I think that question is better answered with the next video. So Vlad also asked me about my general take on rhythms. So I'm preparing a video for that, but that's going to have some graphics to it, and that's going to take a little bit more time. It's on the to-do list. I've sent the graphics request to my wife, and she's making the graphics for me. And so that'll be a different video. And so yes, my idea of the metronome, one of the comments was about how nerve-wracking it is to have the metronome on. Is it okay to spend some time not practicing with the metronome? I would have to say, first of all, take it out of your rudiments. That should take some of the monotony out of it. Don't do the metronome on your rudiments. Oh, by the way, I know I'm just jumping around here. I want to acknowledge one of the reasons I've heard, and it's a legitimate reason, about why we want the metronome on during the rudiments is because there's a psychological thing that happens when we commit to a beat. Everything comes into play. Everything's more focused, right? I think that it's okay not to do that on the rudiments as long as you follow my 50% rule. And it's an old video, but I've got a video on the 50% rule. 50% rule says you should be practicing at least 50% of your practice time should be music. No more than 50% of your time should be spent on exercises. So if you follow that rule, you can take the rudiments out of, the metronome out of the rudiments, use it in your literature practice, and get the benefits that those guys are talking about without having to do it on your rudiments. I hope that makes sense. And that's what I've been following for the last 30 years now. And that works for me, it works for my students. Now, is it okay sometimes to just practice without the metronome? Of course it's okay. You can take a break from the metronome, but what I will say is this. If you're trying to follow a systematic approach to learning a piece of music, you can't do that without the metronome. So without the metronome, you should be focusing more on stuff that isn't part of your literature prep. For example, one great way, I love doing this. I have free improv videos. I'll put a card here for that. But I started as part of my practice time. It's not really practice, but sit down and spend time just playing free improvisation. And that's one way to like unwind after a mind-numbing metronome session. You can also, to make it less mind-numbing, turn the volume down. When you bring the volume on the metronome down, it forces you to listen better. And that's a good thing too. All right? So those are my thoughts on the metronome. And this was a very specific answer to a very specific question. We might do more metronome videos later. For sure, the Metronome Method video will be coming soon. Even though we covered it here, it really should have its own video. But besides that, I just really wanted to make this video to answer Vlad's questions. All right? So there you go. If you have other questions or you have stuff you want to add to this, you can do that in the comments. Other than that, God bless you, and I'm on my way to a gig. Got to get dressed and all that. We'll see you guys on the next video.